I thought my biggest problem was a boring life and a mountain of spreadsheets, until the night a mysterious woman walked into my office and turned me into the primary target of a massive criminal conspiracy. One moment I was managing assets, and the next I was fighting for my life against an organized network, staring down an enormous sentence for crimes I never knew existed. My office had always been a sanctuary of sterile glass and quiet ambition. I spent 14 hours a day managing a high-stakes investment firm, obsessing over quarterly reports and market fluctuations. My personal life, however, was a graveyard of failed dates and superficial connections. That changed the Tuesday Elena walked in. She wasn't one of the regular late-night cleaning staff who shuffled in silently with their heavy buckets and rattling keys. She was new, younger than the others, with a sharp, inquisitive gaze that seemed to linger on my desktop files just a second too long. She wore the standard gray uniform, but she carried herself like she was in the wrong building, at the wrong time. Her movements were precise, too precise for someone just emptying trash bins. I watched her from behind my monitors, pretending to type, while she meticulously polished the mahogany desk. When our eyes met, she didn't look down. She gave me a small, knowing smile that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "You're working late again," she said, her voice smooth, almost melodic, cutting through the hum of the air conditioning. "Most people would be home by now, Mr. Sterling." I was intrigued, perhaps bored enough to entertain a distraction. I was a man who enjoyed the thrill of a challenge, and she was clearly a puzzle. I leaned back, crossing my arms over my chest, feeling the adrenaline of the workday finally cooling off. "Success demands sacrifice, Elena," I replied, glancing at her name tag. "And you? Is this just a paycheck for you, or are you looking for an exit strategy?" She laughed, a low, throaty sound. "Everyone has an exit strategy, don't they? Some just take longer to execute than others." The conversation sparked something in me. It was irrational, impulsive, and entirely unlike me. But as she finished her rounds, I found myself standing up and grabbing my blazer. I invited her to dinner, not to one of the greasy diners nearby, but to a private high-end bistro where I knew the owner. It was a power move, a way to see if she was as sophisticated as she appeared. We sat in a dark corner booth, the candlelight flickering against her sharp features. She navigated the menu with an elegance that made my expensive wine taste like tap water. She wasn't just a cleaner. She was a woman hiding a past she didn't want to disclose. As the night progressed, the wine loosened my tongue. I felt a reckless sense of liberation. I looked at her across the table, watching the way the shadows danced across her face, and felt a surge of intoxicating arrogance. I wanted to see if I could rattle her, if I could make her drop the mask. I leaned in, resting my chin on my hand, and let out a soft, teasing chuckle. "You know, Elena," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "you have a certain quality about you, a mystery. It's almost intimidating. How about this? For the rest of the evening, until the clock strikes 12, you'll be my wife. We'll play the role, toast to our imaginary life, and then, when midnight hits, we go back to being strangers, a little experiment in the absurd." I expected her to laugh, to call me crazy, or perhaps to get up and leave. Instead, she set her glass down with deliberate slowness. Her smile didn't reach her eyes this time. It was cold, calculating. She reached out, placing her hand firmly over mine. Her skin was freezing. "A wife, Mr. Sterling? That's a heavy title to bestow on someone you don't know. You have no idea what kind of baggage comes with that role. You have no idea what you're inviting into your life." "I like risk," I countered, still playing the game. "I thrive on it." She leaned closer until I could smell the faint scent of something metallic. Not perfume, but something sharper, like steel or antiseptic. "Risk is one thing," she whispered, her voice hardening. "But some things you uncover can never be put back under the rug. Are you sure you want to play house with a stranger? Because once the clock hits midnight, I don't think you're going to be able to just walk away." I brushed it off, fueled by the wine and the vanity of the situation. I signaled the waiter for the check, laughing it off as a joke between us. But as we walked out into the cool night air of the parking garage, the atmosphere shifted. The silence of the structure felt heavy, almost suffocating. My luxury sedan was parked in my reserved spot, but something was wrong. One of the rear doors was ajar. I paused, my pulse quickening. Elena stopped beside me, her expression unreadable. She wasn't acting afraid, she was acting expectant. As I took a step toward the car, a black SUV pulled up behind us, blocking the exit. The headlights were blinding, washing out everything in front of me. Two men stepped out, their faces obscured by the shadows, but their movements were unmistakably aggressive. They didn't move like muggers, they moved like a coordinated group. "Is this part of the role play, Mr. Sterling?" Elena asked, her voice eerily calm. I reached into my pocket for my phone, but before I could touch it, the driver's side door of the SUV swung open. A man stepped out, holding a folder that looked identical to the classified documents I had been reviewing in my office earlier that evening, the files that were supposed to be locked in a digital vault. My heart plummeted. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a setup, and the cleaner wasn't the target. I was. The man looked directly at me, his face grim. "Mr. Sterling, we represent the Service of Internal Security. We have reason to believe you've been distributing illegal assets to a local organized scheme. You're under immediate investigation for a major criminal conspiracy. And frankly, looking at what's in this car, you're looking at a massive indictment." I looked at Elena, horror dawning on me. She wasn't looking at the men. She was looking at me, her eyes devoid of any empathy. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small metallic object, and tossed it toward the men. It landed with a heavy, ominous thud at their feet. It was a package with a label that I recognized all too well, a label that carried the weight of an attempt to break my life with a major criminal charge. The world spun. I had been framed, and the wife I had jokingly chosen for the evening was the one holding the strings. As the men stepped toward me with handcuffs, Elena turned to walk away, pausing only to look back at me one last time. "Happy anniversary, darling," she said, just as the clock tower in the distance began to toll for midnight. The sound of the bell tower tolling midnight felt like a funeral march, echoing through the empty concrete levels of the parking structure. Each strike was a hammer blow against my reality, shattering the life I had meticulously built. The men in dark suits, the agents of the Internal Security Service, didn't waste a second. The heavy steel of the handcuffs bit into my wrists with a brutal finality that snapped me out of my state of shock. I looked at the SUV, then at the agents, and finally at Elena, who was calmly adjusting her coat as if she were waiting for a taxi on a rainy Tuesday. "This is a mistake," I shouted, my voice bouncing off the concrete walls. "I don't know who she is. I'm a legitimate businessman. Check my accounts, check my records. You have the wrong person." The lead agent, a man with a face like polished granite, didn't even blink. He reached into the back of my sedan and pulled out a small, unassuming leather briefcase that I had never seen before. He clicked the latches open, revealing rows of small, plastic-wrapped packages filled with a suspicious, fine-grained substance. My stomach turned. I had never touched a prohibited item in my life, yet here I was being presented with the physical evidence of a major criminal operation that would bury me under an enormous sentence. "We don't make mistakes, Mr. Sterling," the agent said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We've been tracking this organized scheme for months. Your office was the hub. You provided the clean, audited facade, and the cleaning lady provided the logistics for the movement of prohibited goods. You two were the perfect cover." Elena stepped closer, her shadow lengthening under the harsh LED lights. She leaned into my ear, her breath cold against my skin. "Don't bother playing the victim, darling," she whispered, so low the agents couldn't hear. "It's unbecoming. You wanted a bit of mystery in your life? You wanted a thrill? Well, you've got it. Now, you get to spend the next few hours explaining to my colleagues why you decided to start playing hero for the wrong side." She turned and began to walk toward the exit of the parking garage, her heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. I watched her go, my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to pull away from the agents, but the one behind me shoved me forward, forcing me to stumble toward the open doors of the SUV. "Wait!" I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the cold air. I was shoved into the back seat, the upholstery smelling of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. As the door slammed shut, I saw Elena pull out a phone. She wasn't just walking away, she was dialing a number. A moment later, the glow of the screen illuminated her face, and she glanced back at me through the tinted glass of the SUV. She gave me a slight, mocking wave. She wasn't leaving the scene. She was reporting in. "Where are we going?" I demanded, turning to the agent next to me. He remained silent, his eyes fixed on the road. We pulled out of the garage and onto the deserted city streets, but we weren't heading toward the police station. We were heading toward the industrial docks, a place where people disappeared without a trace. My mind raced. If I were truly being arrested by official channels, I would be processed at a station, given a call, and granted a lawyer. This was something else entirely. This was a disappearance, masked by the authority of an internal probe. Elena hadn't just framed me. She was connected to a group that operated above the law. I looked down at my hands, the metal cuffs digging into my wrists. I noticed something that had escaped my frantic observation earlier. One of the agents was wearing a specific ring, a heavy signet ring with an embossed symbol that matched a small embroidered patch on the corner of Elena's uniform jacket. It wasn't a government badge. It was a mark of the organized network she belonged to. They weren't internal security. They were the very thing they were pretending to prosecute me for. "You're not with the service," I breathed, the realization chilling my blood. "You're with her." The agent beside me finally looked at me, a thin, cruel smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Sterling, you are so very naive. You think there's a difference between those who hunt the criminals and the criminals themselves? At this level of the game, everyone is a player." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a digital tablet, tapping a few keys before turning it around to show me a document. It was a digital contract, already filled out with my personal data, my bank account information, and a confession of guilt for every transaction the group had made over the past year. All it needed was a digital signature, or, failing that, an authorized thumbprint. "Sign it," he commanded. "If you sign, you get a controlled exit. You go to a low-security facility, you spend your time, and you come out on the other side with a new life provided by our group. You refuse, and we leave you in the harbor with these packages in your pockets. It'll look like a deal gone wrong, a simple case of a corrupt businessman meeting a grisly end." The car swerved, turning off the main road and onto a dirt track that led toward the dark, churning water of the pier. The headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the jagged edge of the dock, where the water slapped hungrily against the rotting wood. I looked at the tablet, then out at the black abyss of the sea. I had, until the count of 3, to decide if I wanted to surrender my identity to the group or gamble my life on a desperate escape attempt. The agent began to count. 1, he said, his hand hovering over the door handle. I caught a glimpse of movement in the side mirror. A motorcycle was tailing us, its headlights dark, its engine muffled. It was someone following the SUV, or maybe someone coming for me. 2, he warned, his voice growing impatient. I braced myself. If I signed, I was theirs forever. If I fought, I was likely a dead man. But as the motorcycle pulled alongside the SUV, the rider raised a hand, and I saw the glint of a silenced weapon pointed directly at the driver's window. The countdown hit 3, but before the agent could say it, the SUV's tire exploded. The vehicle lurched violently, and the world tilted into chaos. The SUV groaned, tires screaming against the cracked concrete as it skidded sideways, slamming into a stack of rusted shipping containers with a bone-jarring impact. The air inside the cabin turned into a chaotic whirlwind of dust and debris. My head whipped against the side window, and for a moment, the world dissolved into a smear of agonizing white light and metallic shrieking. The agent beside me was thrown against the dashboard, the digital tablet flying from his grip and shattering against the floorboard. Outside, the silence of the docks had been replaced by the roar of the motorcycle engine and the heavy thud of boots hitting the ground. I didn't wait for an invitation. While the airbags were deflating and the driver was struggling to regain control of the mangled vehicle, I lunged toward the broken window. The glass sliced into my palm, but the adrenaline numbed the pain. I tumbled out of the wreck, landing hard on the damp, oil-slicked asphalt. My legs were shaky, and the cold air hit my lungs like a physical blow. I looked up and saw the motorcyclist. He was draped in a black tactical jacket, face obscured by a tinted visor. He wasn't one of Elena's men. He moved with a clinical, terrifying efficiency, pulling a device from his belt that emitted a low-frequency hum. The agents inside the car suddenly clutched their ears, screaming in a way that sounded more like physical torment than mere confusion. "Run!" the rider commanded. His voice was distorted, synthesized through a modulator. I didn't need to be told twice. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the throbbing ache in my wrists where the cuffs still bit into my skin. I sprinted toward the maze of shipping containers, my breath hitching in my chest. Behind me, the sound of gunfire, dull, rhythmic pops of silenced weapons, erupted. I knew those weren't just warning shots. I ducked behind a row of steel containers, my heart slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, and the smell of the salty, polluted harbor air felt like a suffocating shroud. I was deep within the territory of the very group that had framed me, and every turn could lead to a dead end or a cold, dark water grave. As I rounded a corner, I nearly collided with a figure standing perfectly still in the middle of a narrow alleyway. It was Elena. She wasn't running, she wasn't hiding. She was holding a small silver device, staring intently at the readout as if she were tracking a heartbeat. She looked up, her expression one of mild annoyance rather than shock. "You really don't know how to stay put, do you, Mr. Sterling?" she asked, flicking her wrist to tuck the device away. "You were supposed to be the perfect mark, the husband who signs his life away and fades into the witness protection programs of the group." "Who are you?" I demanded, backing away, my feet slipping on the slick ground. "What is this? Are you working for them or against them?" She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound that chilled me more than the freezing wind. There is no them and us in this business. There is only the network. And right now, the network has decided you're a loose end. That rider back there? He's not here to save you. He's here to make sure you're erased before you can talk to the real authorities. She stepped forward, and for the first time, I saw the true weight of the situation. She reached into her blazer and produced an object, not a weapon, but a small, flickering microchip reader. You think you were just a cleaner's dinner date? You were the carrier, Sterling. That briefcase they took? It wasn't the evidence of a crime. It was the key to an encrypted server containing the entire offshore ledger of the group. You had the key in your office for weeks, and you never even looked at the bottom of the drawer. The realization hit me harder than the car crash. I had been a pawn, carrying something that every power player in the city would kill to own. "I don't have it," I whispered, shaking my head. "I don't even know what you're talking about." "You don't need to know," she replied, her voice dropping to a dangerous low register. "You just need to be the distraction. See, the rider isn't the only one hunting us." She gestured toward the far end of the dock. A group of men, dressed in the dark, tactical gear of the actual Internal Security Service, were fanning out, their flashlights cutting through the dark like searchlights. They weren't the fake agents I had been trapped with. These were the real deal, and they were closing in on us. "If they catch you, they'll kill you," Elena said, her voice unusually urgent. "If the rider catches you, he'll take the information you unknowingly hold and then kill you. But if you come with me, we have exactly 30 seconds before this entire pier becomes a kill zone." I looked at the converging flashlights, then back at the dark water of the harbor. My mind was screaming, begging for a way out. I was trapped between an assassin, a criminal conspirator, and the law. Elena reached out, her hand extended, palm up. "Choose, Mr. Sterling," she whispered, the lights getting closer. "Trust the woman who framed you, or die as a mystery in a morgue report." I looked at her hand, and then, in the distance, I heard the distinctive sound of a heavy police siren. But it wasn't the standard wail of a squad car. It was a high-pitched, wailing alarm that signaled a total containment protocol. They were locking the docks down. No one was leaving. Elena's eyes widened, and for the first time I saw genuine fear flicker across her face. "They're not just here for us," she breathed, her face pale. "They're here to burn the whole place down." Suddenly the ground shook. A massive explosion ripped through the warehouse at the end of the pier, sending a wall of flame billowing into the night sky. The blast wave knocked us both to the ground. As I lay there, ears ringing and vision blurred, I saw a figure emerge from the fire. A figure holding a weapon that looked nothing like the standard police gear, and in his other hand, he held a phone that was already recording. He looked directly at us, his eyes burning with a manic, vengeful hunger. It was my business partner, the man I had trusted with my firm for the last 10 years, and he wasn't here to save me. He was here to finish the story he had started. He pulled the trigger, and the world went silent. The world didn't go black. It went blinding, neon white, as the business partner I had trusted with my entire life, the man who held the keys to my firm's vault, stood there, weapon trained on my chest. The muzzle flash illuminated his face, distorted by a grin that was entirely alien to the man I thought I knew. He wasn't just a partner, he was the puppeteer. But the shot didn't hit me. Elena shoved me behind a massive steel shipping container just as the air ripped open with the thwip of a bullet embedding itself in the metal. The sound echoed like a bell, vibrating through the cold, corrugated steel. I scrambled backward, gasping for breath, the taste of rust and salt filling my mouth. "Stay low," Elena hissed, her voice no longer melodic or manipulative. It was frantic, survivalist. She pulled a compact, matte black device from her belt, tapping the screen with lightning speed. "He's burning it all. He knows the Internal Security Service is minutes away from closing the perimeter, and he's clearing the digital trail. He's going to make us both the scapegoats for the massive embezzlement that's been happening under our noses for years." "You knew," I shouted, the realization curdling in my gut. "You knew he was the one behind it. You've been working for him, tracking me, keeping me on a leash." She grabbed my collar, pulling me close until our foreheads nearly touched. Her eyes were wide, the cold facade completely shattered. "I wasn't working for him, you idiot. I was sent to steal the ledger back from him. You were the unwitting mule. You had the key in your possession and he knew it. He let you play the part of the wealthy, disconnected boss while he used your digital credentials to launder millions through the organized network. He didn't want you dead until you had already signed the confession. Once you signed, he could wipe the firm, dump the evidence on your corpse, and vanish into the ether with the fortune." Another explosion rocked the pier. A nearby crane, struck by the blast, groaned and began to tilt, its massive steel arms swaying dangerously above us. My partner's voice boomed across the docks, amplified by a loudspeaker. "Sterling, I know you're in there. Give it up. You're already a dead man in the eyes of the law. Why struggle? Just step out, and I promise, the ending will be quick." "He's bluffing," Elena whispered, her hand trembling as she checked her weapon. "He's terrified. He knows that if I get this ledger to the authorities, his life as a golden boy investor is over. He's not going to walk out of here. He's planning to level this entire sector of the harbor to hide the bodies." I looked at my hands, the cuffs still locking my wrists together. The metal was cold, biting into my skin. I remembered the night I hired her, the way he had suggested her specifically. "She's efficient, Sterling. A bit of a ghost, but she'll keep the place spotless." It hadn't been a cleaning hire, it had been a security installation. I was the lamb being led to the slaughterhouse. "How do we get out?" I asked, my voice steadying despite the panic. "You have to have a way out. You didn't come here to die." Elena looked at the encroaching flashlights. The true authorities were closing in, but they were being blocked by a wall of fire set by my partner's men. "There's a cutter docked behind the warehouse. If we can reach the water, we have a chance. But you're the key, Sterling. Physically, your biometric thumbprint is the only thing that can bypass the final encryption gate on the ledger. If you die, the ledger stays locked forever, and he walks away with everything." She handed me a small, jagged piece of metal, a shiv she'd pulled from her boot. "Cut the cuffs. Use the emergency release on the gate at the end of the alley. I'll draw his fire." "Elena, wait!" I grabbed her arm as she prepared to jump into the open, but she shook me off. "If I don't come back," she said, her voice softer, almost sad, The ledger is on the cloud server under your personal login. Just enter the date we met. That's the passcode." Before I could process her words, she bolted into the open. Gunfire erupted from the roof of the warehouse, my partner's private security detail. I saw her weave through the shadows, a blur of motion, drawing their fire away from my position. It was a suicide run, and she knew it. I dropped to the ground, frantic, hacking at the metal cuffs with the makeshift shiv. The steel sparked as I ground the metal against the lock. My hands bled, but I didn't stop. Click. The cuffs fell away. I scrambled to the gate, my heart pounding in my throat, and shoved the heavy iron bars aside. The sound of a heavy-caliber shot rang out, followed by a scream, a woman's scream. My stomach dropped. I rounded the corner of the gate, expecting to see her body, but instead I saw my partner standing at the edge of the pier. His weapon pointed not at Elena, but at a man stepping out of the shadows. It was the rider from the motorcycle. He had taken his helmet off. He wasn't an assassin. He was an officer from the Internal Security Service, the one I had thought was a criminal. He had been undercover the whole time, and he wasn't alone. Behind him, dozens of tactical agents emerged from the smoke, weapons drawn, surrounding the warehouse. My partner looked around, realizing he was trapped. He turned, his eyes locking onto mine across the wreckage-strewn dock. He didn't look defeated, he looked triumphant. He pulled a remote from his pocket. "If I can't have the firm," he roared, his voice cracking with madness, "no one can." He pressed the button. The ground beneath me didn't just shake, it fell. The entire section of the pier, weakened by the previous explosions, began to collapse into the churning black water of the harbor. As the pier disintegrated, I saw the ledger, the device Elena had been protecting, slide out of her belt and land on the very edge of the shifting concrete. I dove for it, my fingers brushing the cold, metallic surface just as the concrete gave way beneath me. I fell into the icy dark water, clutching the device to my chest. But as I surfaced, gasping for air, I saw my partner standing above the abyss, holding a flare gun. He pointed it down at the water, not at me, but at the slick of spilled fuel spreading across the surface of the harbor. He fired, and the water around me turned into a wall of roaring, suffocating fire. The last thing I saw before the flames consumed my vision was a helicopter descending from the smoke, its searchlight focused directly on the device in my hands. The game had changed, and I was now the primary target of every side involved. The surface of the harbor was a furnace, the slick of fuel erupting into a wall of heat that pushed me deep underwater. I kicked, lungs burning, the weight of the ledger, now the most dangerous object in the world, tucked tightly against my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to surface, to breathe, but the flames above were a hungry, swirling vortex. I swam toward the rotted pilings of the pier, finding a hollow space beneath the concrete structure where the water was still dark and shielded. I breached, gasping for air that tasted of sulfur and salt. My clothes were soaked, heavy as lead, and my vision blurred. Through the haze of smoke, I saw the chaos of the final standoff. My partner, cornered by the real tactical teams of the Internal Security Service, was shouting something inaudible over the roar of the fire. The helicopter's searchlight carved through the night, a blinding white beam that danced over the wreckage. I watched, paralyzed, as the tactical team swarmed him. He didn't fight. He stood there, arms raised, a sickening, arrogant smile on his face, as if he knew something they didn't. He was holding a trigger, but it wasn't for the pier anymore. He clicked it, and suddenly every screen in the nearby harbor facility, every digital billboard along the waterfront flickered to life. My face, my name, and a cascade of fabricated documents, ledgers, bank statements, even photoshopped images of me exchanging packages with known radicals, flooded the city's grid. He was burning my life to the ground, digit by digit. "Sterling!" a voice cut through the noise. I turned. Elena was crouched on a partially submerged piece of debris nearby, her arm bleeding, her face covered in soot. She was looking at the ledger I held, her eyes hard. "Give it to me," she commanded. "If the service gets it, they'll bury it. They're just as corrupt as he is. They want the power, not the justice." I hesitated. My partner was being led away in handcuffs, still laughing. The tactical agents were turning their attention toward the water, their flashlights searching the waves. I looked at the ledger, then at Elena. She wasn't just a player, she was the only one who had tried to get me out. "If I give this to you," I said, my voice hoarse, "do you expose them? All of them?" "I don't play the long game," she replied, reaching out. "I end the game." I threw the ledger across the gap between us. She caught it, her fingers gripping the metal casing with a grim satisfaction. She didn't wait for a thanks. She dived into the dark water, disappearing beneath the surface, leaving me alone in the freezing shadow of the pier as the tactical team's boat approached. 6 months later, the world had moved on. The Sterling scandal had been the biggest news story of the decade, a firestorm that had toppled high-level officials and dismantled a massive, shadow-backed organized scheme. My partner was serving an enormous sentence, his arrogance finally silenced by the sheer weight of the digital evidence that had surfaced. Evidence that had mysteriously appeared on every major news outlet's server at the exact moment he thought he had won. I sat in a small, nondescript apartment in a city 3,000 miles away. I had no firm, no money, and no name. I was a ghost, living on a quiet street where no one knew what I had once been. The wife experiment had cost me everything, yet for the first time in years, the silence of my home didn't feel like a void. It felt like freedom. A soft knock sounded at the door. I didn't reach for a weapon. I knew who it was. I opened the door to find Elena standing there, dressed in civilian clothes, looking as ordinary as anyone else. She held 2 cups of coffee. "You're hard to find, Mr. Sterling," she said, offering me a cup. "I'm not Sterling anymore," I replied, taking the coffee. "I know," she smiled, a genuine expression that actually reached her eyes. She turned to look out at the quiet street, where the morning sun was just beginning to hit the pavement. "The network is gone. The ledger did its job. Everyone who needed to pay, paid." "And what about us?" I asked, looking at the woman who had framed me, saved me, and destroyed my life only to set me free. She leaned against the doorframe, looking back at me. "The clock hit midnight a long time ago, remember? The role play is over." "I never did like the midnight deadline," I countered. She chuckled, a low melodic sound that reminded me of that first night in the office. "Well then, I suppose we have the rest of our lives to play a different game." She stepped inside, and I closed the door behind her, locking out the past. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, and for the first time in my life, that was exactly how I wanted it. The story hadn't ended with a tragedy, it had ended with a clean slate. And as the sun rose higher, I realized that sometimes you have to lose the life you built to find the one you were actually supposed to be living. We sat down at the table, 2 strangers who knew exactly how deep the darkness could go, finally ready to enjoy the light.